My having a bundle of currency in my pocket means that I have pleased another human being. As long as I didn't use governmental force to coerce you into giving it to me, and I didn't use a gun, and I didn't hold up a little old lady and take her pocketbook or take it from a convenience store, if I didn't do any of those things and I didn't defraud anybody, then the only way I have that money in my pocket is I have pleased another child of God. It might be my customer, it might be a client, it might be a relative. I don't know. But whoever it is, I've added to the sum stock of goodness and happiness in the world to which my money testifies. That's how I got it.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of Crazy Money. This is your host, Paul Ollinger. I am on vacation right now. You can't hear it, but I am. And I have a special encore episode for you today. It is from May 19th, 2020, and it is one of my favorite episodes, easily in the top 10 out of 115 or so episodes so far. This is my conversation with Rabbi Daniel Lapin. If you haven't heard of him, I strongly urge you to listen to this episode because he is an incredible human being. He is passionate about his faith. He is passionate about his faith in capitalism, and he is passionate about spreading the word. He's also really funny, and we had a great conversation. Let me break it down for you. Did you know that God wants you to be rich? He does. Why? Because the only way that you can make money on a consistent basis in an honorable way is by serving a fellow child of God. And if you serve that fellow child of God, if you exchange goods and services with that fellow child of God, that person will compensate you with money. And that's the only way to earn money on an ongoing, consistent basis. So making money is an honorable, even holy thing. Now, there's a lot of people out there in the world who think that anybody that comes about money and makes a profit is evil by definition. That might be a little bit too strict. Obviously, there's a lot of people who think that billionaires are by definition sinful. But I think Rabbi Lapin will put a lot of this in perspective for you, and I know you will enjoy this conversation. He is the author of a book called Thou Shalt Prosper, which is a refreshing defense of capitalism. And in this conversation, we talk about all different religions. We talk about evangelicalism. We talked about the prosperity gospel, which he disavows, as you will hear. We talk about the respective financial attitudes of Protestants versus Catholics. And yes, why Jews are disproportionately good with money. It's not just a stereotype, he says. It's a real thing, and it's a good thing, and it's not something anybody should be ashamed of. I might be a bit biased in this conversation because the two best financial days of my life were the days that I met the late Dave Goldberg and the day I met Mark Zuckerberg. So suffice to say that this Catholic kid benefited greatly from my association with the tribe, even if I once made a tragic sartorial decision at a Bat Mitzvah, which you'll hear all about in this conversation. It embarrasses me to this day. Is it Yom Kippur? I think I need to do a Day of Atonement for that and just put it behind me. Anyway, you know who you are. You know who I'm talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're going to enjoy this conversation with Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Rabbi Daniel Lapin, welcome to Crazy Money.
Thank you very much indeed. I've been looking forward.
As have I. So you've been described as America's rabbi. What does that mean?
It means absolutely nothing. It is an utterly empty marketing ploy, and I think we should dispense with it. Look, I think Moses might have been the last time that all Jews agreed on a leader. But since that time, if you gathered all several million American Jews into one huge stadium, I guarantee you that if you gave them 30 days to find something we all agreed on, about the only thing we'd come up with is that Hitler was a very bad man.
I will be making the jokes today, Rabbi. So.
Oh, sorry.
That's fantastic. Do you think it has something to do with the fact that evangelical Christians find you to be a very interesting and agreeable person?
Well, if they do, that would be a refreshing first time for me. I think I love them. To be honest, I am of the opinion that biblical faith is what built Western civilization. It's not just the cathedrals of Europe, but it's the economic system itself. And it lies at the heart of why 4,500 Africans drowned in the Mediterranean in 2017 trying to get to Europe, but not a single European drowned in the Mediterranean trying to swim to Africa. And so evangelicals as the modern day heirs of what built the United States of America, I think they also stand for a tradition and a set of values that probably is the only shot at preserving the Republic beyond a very typical, in terms of world history, 300 years for one republican, considering that we've been going since 1789 with one constitution. We're kind of running out of time unless through the biblical value system of 60 million American evangelicals, the same kind of durability that somehow was built into Israel. And, there they are going strong with a gross domestic output in the Middle East equivalent to the 4 contiguous nations with 20 times their population. It's a pretty good record. And so my love affair with evangelicals is based on their commitment to a set of biblical values, which my people gave to the world. And which
Thank you very much for your contributions.
And which I think will at least contribute to America being a viable home for my children in the future.
You don't often hear religious figures speaking about the power of commerce and the power of money. In fact, many people believe the world is divided into the sacred and the profane, and that money belongs solely in the latter category. But you say unequivocally that money is holy. What do you mean by that?
I knew this was going to be fun. But you certainly prepare for your interviews, I'll tell you that. And that, as you probably know, is not all that common, really.
That is my duty to you and my guests.
Well, I certainly appreciate it and value it. So, yes, the core of the approach is essentially unity. It's the unification of an entire worldview. And so you might say, for instance, that the comprehensive necessity of being able to wrap up in one's approach to oneself and to raising one's children and perhaps even to public policy, apropos of strange times, is the necessity to combine compassion with strength. And so raising children with only compassion means you're going to raise monstrous brats.
Yes.
And raising children with only discipline means a tyrannical household that's no fun for anybody. And so it's combining those two, which is essentially what we see as God's unity as well. So, when it comes to things like money, we absolutely do not see, and I think it's a dreadful error and one that handicaps the revenue model of many, many, many individuals around the world, is this idea that somehow God is interested in all those heavenly things up there and how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. And by the way, I couldn't be less interested in theology, because theology is what people think about God. It's just guess and speculation. I'm interested in Bible, which is what God thinks about human beings. Now, I think that's worth studying, but not theology. And so a key part of this is that money and sex, if you'll pardon me, because I think that it suffers from the same kind of problem, which people assume, well, that's obviously not holy. How can anything that provides pleasure be holy? And money, everybody knows money is just the result of greed. And so how can that be holy? And I think probably the success of my books and my message is due in no way to me personally, but in every way due to the intuitive and transcendent truth of this idea that making money is part of God's plan for human economic interaction, as opposed to some kind of dreadful thing that when God's attention was distracted by some trouble spot in the Balkans, he looked back and he said, oh my me, look what they've done. They've introduced money and commerce.
So where did we go wrong then? When did we start thinking about money as being evil? Was that from the beginning?
I'm not that much of a historian. I think it's a very natural thing. If one would postulate placing a little boy and a little girl on an isolated desert island, and we set in place clandestine surveillance equipment and sort of watch them over the years, is it possible that they'll come up with some kind of a superstitious deity? More than likely. And is it possible that he'll impose certain restrictions on their appetites and yearnings? Possibly too. I don't know when this happened, but it may be very, very deeply rooted. What I do know is that so many of us are profoundly impacted by this idea that making money is intrinsically reprehensible. And it's the province of greedy people. It's the province of people who don't really care about important things like society. And so as a result of that, what tends to happen is that you have situations like, my babysitter, who when my wife and I get home and I say to her, how much do I owe you? And she sort of looks downcast at the carpet and she starts moving her foot in patterns around the rug because she's embarrassed to tell me she wants money from me.
Yes.
And then she usually says something like, would $8 an hour be okay? And, we've been gone for 3 hours. And so I said to her, no, it wouldn't. And you know where I'm going with this, obviously. She didn't. And I said, I think $10 an hour would be better. And she didn't quite know where to go. And I said, look, you did such a great job. And we felt confident being out of the house and everyone went to bed nicely. And so we want to know we can call you again. And we want to make it worth your while so that next time we call you, you'll answer our phone call and come back again. So that's what I'd like to pay you. Is that okay with you? This is, there's just a different way of looking at things.
I was going to wait a second to get to this, but you bring up a very interesting point. In your book, I read a line that I found very thought-provoking, and it was this: Jews have never been handicapped on business by feelings of confusion about money. The conviction that business was honorable spurred them on to succeed. So that conviction of them doing God's will through business actually helps them negotiate better.
That's right. Very, very much so. Because, look, by the way, your book about the MBA, I hope it's doing great. And if I can ever help promote it, I think it's terrific. And
you just did. You have just given me a quote.
Good. Well, please use it to good effect, because all I was going to say is that every Econ 101 course has a different definition of money, but it's always something like, medium of exchange, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. But through Jewish eyes, money is much more than that. It is essentially a beautiful little green certificate of good performance. My having a bundle of currency in my pocket means that I have pleased another human being, maybe more than one. As long as I didn't use governmental force to coerce you into giving it to me, and I didn't use a gun, and I didn't hold up a little old lady and take her pocketbook or take it from a convenience store, if I didn't do any of those things and I didn't defraud anybody, then the only way I have that money in my pocket is I have pleased another child of God. It might be my customer. It might be a client. It might be a relative. I don't know. But whoever it is, I've added to the sum stock of goodness and happiness in the world to which my money testifies. That's how I got it.
Conducting business is every bit as holy as raising children or growing crops or helping your neighbor in a time of trouble.
Beautifully put. Absolutely. So as a matter of fact, something that, there's so many questions I'd love to ask you, because you seem to have, from what little I know of your career, you seem to have, for the moment at least, turned your back on corporate America and cutting edge technology. And you're sort of exploring deep ideas.
Trying to, yes.
That's what it looks like to me. And so I'd love to answer your question, and I'm going to take the chance of answering in a way I don't think I've answered on previous interviews, or at least not lately. And that is by homing in on exactly this point. I don't think it is an accident that not only in the Lord's language, in which the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, but even in English, there is this idea of service being applied to both worship and customer, worship service and customer service. In the Bible and in the Hebrew, this is just kind of interesting. There are several places that are translated in the King James translation and most subsequent translations as work. For instance, God put Adam in the Garden of Eden to work it, and 10 commandments, fourth commandment, 6 days shalt thou work, and so on and so forth. And then there are a number of places where there's a word that's translated as serve. Let my people go, said Moses to Pharaoh, so that they may worship God in the desert. And then towards the end of the book of Joshua, for instance, Joshua says, you know what? You people are driving me nuts. You can do whatever on earth you like. But as for me and my family, we shall worship the Lord. And so I've mentioned 4 biblical citations. 2 are translated as work and 2 are translated as worship. And the fascinating thing is that in Hebrew, it's all the same word. Mm. And so all this does is confirm exactly the way you phrased your question, which is that when we take care of customers, when we take care of the needs and the desires of God's other children through economic activity, we are serving him every bit as devotedly as we do in church on Sunday morning or in synagogue. And the big mistake is that people assume that since I pocket revenue as a result of one of those activities, namely the work, it somehow diminishes its purity and detracts from the spiritual significance of the action. And I explain at length in lectures and in my writing why that is a fallacy. It's simply not true. And so in exactly the same way, you have how many children? 3?
I have 2.
2 children. How old are they?
9 and 10.
So I'm sure you don't have squabbling in your household, but we
Never.
And there comes a magic moment where you find they're no longer squabbling and they're constantly trying to help one another and do things for one another. And you're going to derive this incredible sense of satisfaction. And you're going to say to yourself, hey, in this, perhaps one of my most important jobs on this planet, I've actually done okay. Look at them.
Right.
And that's kind of how our Father in heaven views it when we take care of business, because we are taking care of customers and clients and employees and vendors and all his other children. Our money merely testifies to our effectiveness at doing that.
So are there other faith traditions that equivocate on this or that have teachings that pull them away from a full commitment to business as being honorable? I'm not asking you to throw any religions under the bus here. I'm just sort of... How do you feel about Buddhists, Rabbi?
Well, I mean, look, I don't mind telling you that I think it would be just fine for people to apply the same standards to business as they do to purchases of tech equipment or cars or anything else that plays an important role in your life. You basically try and find the one that'll satisfy your needs most effectively. Look, I mean, I do think it's not an accident that, bathrooms and banks in Beijing and Bombay and Bangkok look exactly now like bathrooms and banks in Boston and Birmingham. It didn't go the other way around. Basically, the other cultures of the world followed Christian civilization. And they stopped using a hole in the ground and they started using waterborne sewage systems, which was one of the blessings of Western civilization. The idea of, keeping your money in the form of gold in your mattress as opposed to banks. Again, this came from Western civilization. In fact, there is no such thing as a capital market ever having arisen indigenously in a non-Christian country. Now, today we have stock markets in Accra and in Bangladesh, but that's not where they began. Mm. And so I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but I do think that the Judeo-Christian biblical tradition has been much more successful in building a society and a culture to which people vote with their feet by trying to come to such countries. The direction of immigrant travel is almost invariably certainly if you look at the MENA countries, Middle East, North African countries, the travel is entirely from Islam to Christianity in terms of cultural choice and economic preference. Now, of course, people say, well, that's just because those are richer countries. Well, obviously, the whole question is why? What made those countries more financially successful, particularly at a time when today capital knows no boundaries and information knows no boundaries? So it's very difficult. And many people, Jared Diamond and Samuelson and all the other people, Neil Ferguson, they've written terrific books, all trying to explain this enormous enigma of the West and the rest. And the bottom line is that nobody really likes the answer, which is it's a Bible culture.
Right.
And again, I explain that at great length. But the bottom line is I actually don't know anything at all about the theology of other faiths. I can't really answer how other faiths believe in that. But I would say, based on the evidence of cultural economic success, I would say that Judeo-Christian Bible-based is quite different. And it would also seem as if there are even important differences, which I can identify at some time, in Protestantism and Catholicism. Because if you think about Belgium and Holland, these are two countries with the same racial stock and the same meteorology and the same natural resources or lack thereof. And Belgium is a basket case. They're basically the bureaucrats of the European market. And Holland is a powerhouse. Or North Ireland and South Ireland, where South Ireland is a beautiful place, by the way. If you haven't visited,
excellent
run,
golf.
Don't walk.
Oh, I've been.
Yeah, it's great. But it's basically, guys sitting around drinking Guinness. I mean, there's not a whole lot going on there. But in Northern Ireland, they have shipyards. That's where the Titanic was built, not sort of a great mark of success. But the difference is Protestantism and Catholicism, or North Belgium and Holland, Protestantism and Catholicism, North Italy and South Italy. South Italy, again, all the way down to Sicily, you're talking about peasants sitting on the hillside, eating olives and drinking vino. There's not a whole lot going on there. And God bless them. I love going to Italy. It's beautiful. But go to North Italy and they build Hermes scarves and Ferraris and Lamborghinis. And the whole fashion industry is up there. And again, Northern Italy, closer to Protestant Europe. South Italy, very heavily Catholic from Rome southwards. And it seems to have an enormous impact on economic productivity. So, answer to a straightforward question, and even then we haven't really finished it, but it's probably enough.
Well, I'm interested. I was raised Catholic, and I would say that my conflicted relationship with money is not entirely unrelated to being raised Catholic.
Actually, you feel that.
I think that, I remember saying to my mother driving around, my father always had a job. We were always stable, but there were 6 kids and large extended family. And so there was sort of always more desires, at least among the children, than there were resources from the parents. And I interviewed my father, and he said, I just didn't think we needed it, so I didn't buy it, and he's a very logical, good man. But I remember saying to my mom, I said,
by the way, is that podcast with your dad up on your site?
I can send you a link to it. It's an earlier episode that's on whatever podcast app.
Would you do that, please?
Absolutely.
I really would be interested.
Absolutely. Driving around with my mom around suburban Atlanta, where I grew up and where I live again, after many years traveling the earth looking for affluence and technology stock options, I saw a car and I said, what kind of car is that? And she said, that's a Mercedes. And I said, I like that car. She said, they're very expensive. I said, well, how do you make a lot of money? She said, well, you need to get a high-paying job like being a lawyer. And I said, I want to be a lawyer because I want to have a Mercedes. And then she sort of said, well, how would you feel about driving a Mercedes when there's so many hungry people in the world? And from there, I'm screwed. So that's very different than the prosperity gospel and that a lot of the messaging that you espouse. And so I find it very interesting.
If you don't mind, let me just interrupt by distancing myself dramatically from prosperity gospel.
Okay.
And may I take 30 seconds on the distinction?
By all means.
Prosperity gospel, and I'm no expert on that either, but basically it's the religious version of the attraction principle. You remember that book of a number of years ago, Pray for What You Want Badly Enough, and visualize it and put up pictures in your mind and on your wall, and it'll come to you.
Right.
It's difficult for any semi-sophisticated human being to view that as anything beyond unadulterated bilge water. It makes absolutely no sense, unless you postulate that when you asked God for a Ferrari, he did hear you and he did answer you and he said no.
Right.
But that's not the biblical approach at all. The Jewish approach is quite different, and that is not, please God, could you send me $300 so I can make my payment on the car this month? It's, please God, show me which of your children might need my services so I can take care of their needs. The focus and the obsession is entirely on satisfying the needs of other people, pleasing other people. And when you think about it, that is the connection between sex and money. They're connected in hugely important and powerful ways. But one of the most important is that in both of them, the ultimate thrill comes from pleasing and pleasuring somebody else.
Yeah.
That's how we view business. It's not what I want. What I want will come automatically. I don't think about revenue. I focus only on providing.
So let me ask a related question. On the one hand, you believe that living a life of character is a key element in building a life of affluence. On the other hand, do you believe that God is an interventionist God who determines who will be rich and who will be poor?
Gosh, you're determined to drag me kicking and screaming into theology. I can see it. But I'm going to answer.
I'm not sure where the line of theology starts and ends, but by no means do I mean to catch you contradicting yourself or trip you up. I assume you're far better at this than I am.
No, not at all. It's a pleasure talking with you, and I don't feel waylaid or trapped in any way whatsoever, so don't worry about it. But no, let me answer. It's obviously an important question. Okay, somebody goes up to the 20th floor of a building, opens the window, climbs out, and jumps. And he has a very thrilling ride of about 6 seconds, which it could even be enjoyed if one didn't have to think about the future.
Yeah.
And the truth is that the fall doesn't kill him. It's only the rather sudden stop at the end. And so he shows up at the pearly gates, and the good Lord says to him, what the heaven did you do that for? And he says, well, I've always been a good person throughout my life. I'm in church every Sunday, and I study the Bible, and I listen to the pastor, and I put money in the collection plate, and I take care of widows and orphans, and I'm a good husband and a good father. How could you let me do that? I thought you'd catch me. And God's answer is, hey, I gave you a system of science. I told you that you live in a unified world. Monotheism and scientific development have always gone together. It is hard to find any culture that has developed scientifically that isn't a culture that isn't monotheistic. Now, again, there are lots of instances where you can see that it's the whole idea of that unity. You should have studied the physics, and then you would have known not to do that. This is my parable, if you like, for the interventionist God. How's about the poor person? After a difficult life dealing with poverty, he finally comes before the good Lord and says, how are you doing? He says, well, I'll tell you the honest truth. It's kind of a relief to be here because things were really rough for the last 40 or 50 years. What do you mean? He says, I had to fight and struggle for every penny, and I constantly had to worry. And God says, yeah, but whose fault was that? And he says, what do you mean? He says, well, I gave you a system. I told you what you have to do if you want money. You see, I don't really care if you have money or not. That, as God, that's not my main concern. My main concern is that you should connect with other people. My biggest no-no is for people to be alone and isolated. I told you that. I started off my Bible. 8 times I told you things were good. Everything was good. When's the very first time I used the phrase not good? Not good for man to be alone. Now, you were a dummy. You thought that meant and applied uniquely to Adam's matrimonial prospects. It didn't. It was a general statement for all of humanity at all time. I detest people being lonely and isolated. And I'm a good God, so I even incentivized it. I made it easy. And I connected one of your deepest desires, namely money, with connecting with other people. And that's why one of the most reliable correlations with wealth creation is, in fact, connection. And so, yeah, the system is set up. God wants people not to be alone. He wants us to connect with one another. He incentivized us with two great things, sex and money. And neither of them can you succeed in alone.
You say that faith is the fuel that drives commerce. What does that mean exactly?
Well, let's imagine that I am the bearer of bad tidings. And the sad information I have, which I hoped not to have to tell you until we'd finished our interview, is that 1 hour after the end of our interview, the world is coming to an end.
I would believe it now more than I would have 8 weeks ago.
Yes, I can understand. But in this case, it's actually a giant meteorite.
Okay.
And, look at it this way. It's been a pretty good ride. And it's not just the Baptists or the Catholics. It's the Jews as well. Everybody's going. And as soon as we finish this interview, we'll go out and discover that everyone else actually knows that information already. What has happened to your net worth?
It's become irrelevant.
It's like zero.
Yes.
Yeah. If you try and monetize any of your assets, if you try and liquidate, nothing you own is of any value anymore. You've literally had your fortune wiped out. How? By you and everyone else around us believing that there is no tomorrow. Now, the good news is I was lying. See?
Oh, wow. I just sold everything. You didn't see me, but I just sold everything.
A man of the cloth shouldn't lie, right? But there you go. I just did. And the good news is that everything is fine.
Oh, wow.
And that's why the phrase, "in God we trust," is not placed on the walls of churches where you'd expect to find it. It's placed on the currency. Because without faith in tomorrow, and by the way, that's the definition of a recession.
Is lack of belief in tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And the surest way to correct a recession is if everybody starts believing, hey, you know what, everything's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so that is a little bit of why and how faith is connected with commerce.
It's funny, I was on a walk with my 9-year-old daughter yesterday, and my son's been watching a lot of World War II videos to fill the days. At least I can rationalize by saying it's educational. And she said, well, why did...
May I give you an unsolicited tip?
Absolutely.
And I know nothing is as unwelcome as unsolicited advice.
Nonsense.
But they're just the right age. You should set them up with a World War II movie, or for that matter, some of the older John Wayne movies. He made 80 cowboy movies. Mm-hmm. And every one of them is a demonstration of manliness and honor. Every one.
We watched Patton the other day.
Right. A perfect one. There's also a lot of movies like The Guns of Navarone.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the older World War II movies. But what I would recommend is something I've done, and that is prepare in advance 6 or 7 questions having to do with values in the movie. Mm. And then when the movie's done, take a walk with him or sit down somewhere or have an ice cream or whatever and say, I watched that movie as well. And, here's one of the questions I had, and I'm really baffled by this. What do you think? Now, I'm not quizzing you. I'm enlisting your opinion, what you learned from this. Some of the most fabulous conversations I had with our son was after these movies in consequence to a list of questions I had prepared on one of my 3x5 cards I used for it.
That's a great idea. And in fact, I just think maybe being 10% more purposeful can actually turn, 90 minutes of killing time into, a big step in a relationship. Yeah. And it's similar to what happened yesterday when I was walking with my daughter. She said, well, why did Japan invade China? And we got into a conversation around resources and the resources that Japan needed. And she said, well, instead of invading, why didn't they just trade? And I was like, oh my goodness, my heart is full with that question of yours.
Isn't that beautiful?
And I said, and I was like, yeah. And I was like, I said, well, that is one of the best questions you've ever asked me. What's required to engage in trade? What do people need in between each other to engage in trade? And I was trying to get to trust, and so that's where that conversation began. And one of the reasons I may have come up with that thought was because in your book, you talked about the origins of lending for ancient Jewish civilizations being a trust that existed among Jews that didn't exist among other distantly related entities, whether they be municipalities, nation states, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Where did that come from, and how has that made such a big difference in Jewish thinking for all these years?
Well, the trust and closeness comes not from shared facts, but from shared beliefs. And so if you and I both know the speed of the internet, that's not really going to do a whole lot for us. But if, let us say, we both think that some of the countryside outside Atlanta is some of the most beautiful parts of America, now we're talking beliefs, not facts. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, we actually have a relationship.
Right.
So that's the important thing. Beliefs build bonds, not facts. And one of the things that Jews are connected with one another by is essentially a system of beliefs. By the way, that's not true for all Jews, as I hinted at earlier. There are schisms, huge schisms within what passes for the Jewish community. There isn't even such a thing as the Jewish community. But at least in Judaism, it is a shared belief system which brings about closeness and trust.
At what stage in your life did you start thinking about money through the lens of religion or philosophy?
I wish I could tell you in the cradle. I wish it would have been true, but it wasn't. I began speaking for Christian audiences. It was my first time speaking to non-Jewish audiences was in the very early 90s, which is, quite a while ago. And I spoke at many, many Christian events, Christian colleges, Christian churches, Christian groups. And people got to know me, and more importantly, they got to trust me. And they realized that I didn't operate on an anti-Semitic hair trigger. Not everything that has happened in Jewish history is anti-Semitic. Not everything.
Yes. I once wore jeans to a bat mitzvah. That's my biggest crime against the good people.
You probably may have got in for a bout of anti-Catholicism over there, I suspect.
It was, believe me, I don't go a day without thinking about it, and it's been years now.
Yes.
Can you offer me absolution for that? I don't know if it works like that in Judaism, but in Catholicism, I could get absolution.
For a price.
We call those indulgences.
Yes, that's right. Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, they got some things right.
That's right.
But what happened was people felt comfortable asking me the problematic question, which is, why are Jews so disproportionately good with money? And they knew that I wasn't going to explode into an indignant fit of anti-Semitic fury. My first thought was, what a good question. Mm. My second thought was, hey, there are poor Jews. But the way the question is phrased is absolutely true. We are disproportionately good with money. And it's not just now in America. It's even in the 19th century when Mark Twain wrote about it and commented on Jews and money. And it's not only America, it's Europe. And you can go back to Max Weber and many of the other scholars in economics who also asked this question. So that was really the first time I began to seriously explore this. And I decided to be very open about it and even acknowledge the possibility that the reason that Jews do well with money is the same reason that the old Oxford English Dictionary lists the word Jew as a verb, as in to Jew somebody. Mm. Maybe Jews are just good at ripping people off. And that's, I guess, honesty isn't the best policy, really. Total moral flexibility is the best policy, as long as you're operating in the short term. If you're operating in the long term, that's a totally different thing, because reputation counts. and we see the value of a brand, obviously. So, I mean, when Chrysler bought Jeep for, I think, $2 billion, I believe, all they got was the name and a sort of semi-rundown, worthless plant in Toronto. But brands really matter. And so reputation counts, and over the long term. And so I really looked at that possibility, and I even interviewed large numbers of Christians who had done business with Jews over the years. Are there scoundrels in the Jewish basket? Absolutely. I know one of your podcasts interviews the victim of one. So, of course there are, but no more than in any other group.
Right.
And so that didn't explain it. And so it was at that point that I began to embark on a serious analysis on this subject, which I'd never thought about before, which is, why are Jews good with money? I mean, is it, which are now fully discredited, stupid racial theory that Jews have a money gene in their sperm that gets passed down to their kids? So I had to discredit and debunk many of the common explanations. I found 4 explanations that I methodically debunked. And when I had done that, I was left with the need of now researching what the real explanation is. And that was when I began to probe into many, many, many volumes. I know the podcast is audio, but if I could show you some of the large books in the shelf behind me, you'll see that I had my work cut out for me.
Yeah.
And that resulted in my first book, Thou Shalt Prosper, the 10 Commandments for Making Money. And that book got severely edited by the publisher, saying they don't want it to be too religious. So they don't want too much in the way of biblical references or anything. And so, obviously I complied, and the book, sold and sells brilliantly. But they came back to me a few years later and they said, hey, you remember all that stuff we cut out? And I said, yeah, you won't be interested in this. A lot of it is biblical stuff. They said, no, we're okay with that now. So we published a new book called Business Secrets from the Bible, 40 success strategies for financial abundance, Business Secrets from the Bible, which, by the way, just this week got published in Korea. The secret emerged very clearly from all that research, which is that ancient Jewish wisdom, looking at the Bible through that lens of ancient Jewish wisdom, is what provided an understanding, in the same way that most people learn that you don't step out of windows on the 20th floor.
Right.
Most Jews begin to understand that there's a set of biblical principles that are crucial to developing wealth. And one of them right off the bat is something we opened our conversation with today, which is understanding that nobody can really succeed at any activity that deep down he considers to be morally reprehensible.
But even more than that, it seems to me, and I don't know that much about what you were doing prior to writing the first book you mentioned, but I know you were a rabbi in a congregation in Los Angeles, and you had worked.
That's correct.
Yes, you'd worked in financial services. But
correct.
It was at that point where you started to put together this religious interpretation of wealth and affluence that you answered the question for yourself: how do I serve most of God's children in the most valuable way? And that is where your affluence and notoriety and celebrity came from, is that when you answered that question for yourself, like, oh, is that your mission now? Is that the definition of a mission, when we find that part of ourselves that is contributing the most back to all of our fellow human beings?
Please don't say back, because that means while you were making money in the first place, you were stealing it. I recognize the distinction from the book, but what I mean is that, and I think that my journey as far as what I'm trying to do here is, like, the more I try to scale this up, the more I try to scale up being a comedian, the more I try to have people interested in what I do and have to say, the more I have to answer the question, well, what need do they have that I can help them with? That's right.
Because until I can answer that question, I am just a generically funny-ish guy. But if I can turn that into a product that has value to them, and a product without which they don't live as well, then that's what they're going to pay for. And that's what they'll come back for. And that's what they will share with all their friends, which is exactly the way I heard about you.
Oh, really?
Yes. When my listeners said, do you know of Rabbi Daniel Lapin? And I said, I had not heard of him. And as I started to read, I'm like, oh, I want to talk to this guy.
And you're more than funny-ish, by the way. I have seen some of your comedy videos.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
And I look, again, in Jewish thinking, somebody who makes other people laugh has a special little corner of heaven set aside for him. Because laughter is one of the ways we're distinguished from the animal kingdom. No animals laugh. Now, I don't mean to offend all the millions of pet-owning listeners you have. So I apologize to all of you folks.
My wife, number one, so.
Right. But unfortunately, your dog or your goldfish are not smiling or laughing. They really aren't. They may be content. They may be even happy in some form or another, but they're not laughing. Laughing is unique to human beings. And so helping humans laugh is hugely valuable, particularly if it can be done without falling back on sex, toilets, and God. Those are three areas of humor which we do find funny precisely because we know that we're not animals. Because if we were, there'd be nothing funny about toilet functions. It's only that we're slightly awkward about activities that we seem to share with animals, namely toilet, sex. And then, of course, God is funny because we're just, people are, again, uncomfortable about it.
Yes. But do you find, are you more in touch with your mission today, or has it become more clear to you than before you had found this insight into money and religion?
I think I was somewhat fortunate. It's certainly more so than somewhat earlier. But when I was serving my congregation in California, although I wasn't as focused, and right now, by the way, I'm very much focused. My new book that I'm working on is the connection between money and sex.
Oh, interesting. We'll have to have you back on when that comes out. I'd love to talk about that with you.
Yeah, I mean, that's really important because you would have thought that after 60 years of gender egalitarianism, you'd have thought that by now, at least half the marriages we know of would have come about not because a man went down on one knee and held out a ring to a girl, but because a girl went down on one knee, held out a gold Rolex watch to a guy and said, make me the happiest girl in the world by marrying me. But that doesn't happen. And you'd also have thought that girls would be delighted if a guy holds out a $6 ring he got at the flea market for an engagement, and she'd say, I'm so proud to get married to a man who's so frugal. That's not what girls do.
I think my mom might have said that.
Well, maybe later, but at the time she was happy to get a ring that your dad worked for.
Correct.
So yeah, the sex and money is very close. And so I'm very, very involved with that right now. To the extent that my mission was always making the secrets of ancient Jewish wisdom accessible to people. I did that for my congregation. And again, the focus is on, what I call my 5 Fs. Faith is obviously one of them, but so is family, friendship, finance, and fitness. These are all areas where I'm just not interested in how many angels can dance on the head of a pin, but I sure want to know how the best way is to operate my sexual relationships. I surely want to know the best way to operate my friendships and my financial relationships. Those are things that really, really matter.
Without question. If there's one misconception about business and money that frustrates you the most, what is that?
It's particularly when business professionals themselves seem to have no understanding whatsoever of the inherent dignity and morality of the process of business. I bristle uncontrollably and often all too visibly when an arrogant, self-made, successful man piously intones the phrase, well, after having done so well, I've decided it's time for me to start giving back. And that just sets me on a slow burn, precisely because if giving money to charity is giving back, then it's pretty clear what you think you were doing to society while you were making the money in the first place. So that is certainly, that giving back notion bothers me. It bothers me very much when commencement speakers talk to a class of college leavers and tell them things like, two of the things that drive me so upset, it's probably why I don't get invited anymore to be a commencement day speaker, because on two occasions that I remember clearly, I was the speaker after somebody who got up and spoke about the wonders of public service and encouraging the graduating class to go into the phrase I put quotes around, public service. And I got up and I said, look, I'm going to toss out my prepared remarks because I think as a service to the graduating class, I have to disagree with the previous speaker, and not by way of a debate or hurling around words as projectiles. It's just a civil disagreement, and I would like the graduating class in its own time to make up its own mind between my preceding speaker and myself. And my view is that, number one, any activity that needs a euphemism is not a beautiful and clean activity.
Right.
You know, there's a reason that Ralph Cramden in The Honeymooners had a friend who was a sanitation engineer, because that sounds better than saying I work in the sewers. Mm-hmm. And so public service, all that really means is you want to go and work for government. And the reason I disagree with that advice is because if you go to work for government, all that means is another 10 fingers in my wallet, because you're going to have to be paid. And the only way to do that is to extricate more money from me by newly confiscatory rates of taxation. The last thing I want to see is you people all going into government. I'll tell you what I'd love you all to do. I'd love you all to go into business and promise yourselves you'll all make $1 million before you're 30. That would be the most selfless and kind and loving thing you could do. Because the absolute only way you'll be able to make $1 million is if you provide me with $1.5 million worth of goods and services.
Yeah.
The only reason you get me to reach into my pocket and buy your app or buy your product or buy your services is because those things you're giving me are worth more than the money I'm giving you. You improve my life. There's a reason why today's luxuries become tomorrow's necessities. The way that ordinary people like us live now, the most affluent aristocrats of our great-grandparents' era didn't live as well.
How'd the students react?
A lot of people flocked. Faculty reacted very, very badly.
What a shock. What a shock.
Students flocked around me afterwards. They'd never heard such a thing.
I'm not surprised.
Those are the things that I think are horrible misconceptions. Going to make $1 million, that's not greedy. You're providing so much more value to everyone else around you.
Yeah.
And I speak about charity. I sometimes say to people, why do you want to be wealthy? And especially if, I won't specify an audience, but what people very often say is, well, because I'd like to be able to do good for so many other people. I'd like to be able to bless other people with gifts. Whether you give charity or not, that's a totally separate discussion. But that's not a reason to make money. The reason to make money is the only way you can do it is by serving God's other children.
I lived in a neighborhood in San Francisco for a couple of years called Cole Valley. And in that neighborhood was a outstanding cheese shop, a coffee joint that was unparalleled, where they took great care and precision with your beverage, one of the best restaurants on the West Coast, a great dry cleaner, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You know, a market with just the
all
best
these
meats.
Small businesses that enhanced your life.
And I'm like, I live in the best neighborhood because of the people who have put their capital at risk to create opportunities for me to enjoy life more. I don't know why, but it was maybe the first time in my life that sunk in for me.
I could not agree more. You put your finger on it precisely. That's exactly right. There's a Korean-American couple that run a dry cleaner around here. Now, the Hertz Rent-A-Car Corporation is running out of cash, right? We're barely 2 months into this corona crisis, and I I hope you didn't mean this recording to be evergreen. I've just gone and dated us.
No, it's fine. This is a time and place. And my last question relates to that. So please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that Hertz is running out of cash. How about my little dry cleaner store? They're terrific. If I bring in something that needs a button, I don't even know a button is dangling. They fix it. They're terrific. I'm finding myself taking stuff in there now that I don't even need cleaned because I just want to help them survive. I just want them to be there.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting. Well, along those lines, plagues played an important role in the liberation of the Jewish people from Egypt.
Yes.
What significance do you see in what we're dealing with right now with coronavirus? What can we all take away from this?
That you are watching the most dastardly and incredibly stupid overreaction that we've ever witnessed. The idea that we've sold out to experts, and something that I've tried to help people understand is that whether I need antibiotics for a fever I've developed, or whether I need surgery for a hernia or whatever, all of those things, I will speak to a doctor. I might speak to several doctors, and then I'll make a decision. But if during that discussion, one of the doctors also says, by the way, while we're talking about your hernia, how'd it be if I also book you in to do a facelift? And I say, excuse me? He says, yes. You'd make more money if you looked younger, and I think we can knock 20 years off your age if we do it. At that point, he's moved outside the area of medicine. There are all kinds of other questions. My value system, my finances, my discretionary income, all of these questions have nothing to do with medicine. My point is that public health is not a medical question. Public health takes into account economics as well, because people die from depression, people die from anxiety. Men suffer dreadfully from unemployment, sexual dysfunction goes almost hand in hand with unemployment, almost always. These are huge problems. And so the idea that specialist doctors, and I understand that to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And to a doctor, I understand that a doctor says nobody may go back to work until a vaccine has been invented. I get that. But they're wrong, because now they've moved outside of medicine into the area of public health. And that's not. And so I would say, apropos of that, in terms of what might be of value for our listeners, is that one must run for the hills when you hear experts being quoted or people say studies reveal. Don't surrender your own intelligence. God gave you a mind to figure things out. I'm not saying that you and I know medicine, and epidemiology. No, we don't know that. But we know what questions to ask. And then after that, we know how to make judgments that are best for us and for our families, and maybe even for our communities. So it's been an enormously worrying time. I'm not nearly as worried about coronavirus as I am by what we've done to the economy.
Well, Rabbi Daniel Lapin, thank you very much for your time. This has been a most enjoyable conversation. Where can our listeners find out more about you and your work?
Well, the best place is my website, as people know today. And one way to get to my website is the URL youneedarabbi.com.
I love it.
So that makes it easy to remember, right? youneedarabbi.com. The same website is reached by rabbidaniellapin.com. Same thing. And that's really the best place to look. On the financial front, not only are my books there, but I also have some audio programs, including one called Prosperity Power, meaning the prosperity power is connecting for success. This idea that not good for man to be alone. So therefore, what are the incentives for getting connected with people? The incentives are huge. And how do we connect? How do we build a metric for our connection so you can actually measure it and improve it? Those are some of the things I cover in resources on my website.
And as if you hadn't figured it out, dear listeners, there is tremendous wisdom in Rabbi Lapin's work, and I highly recommend it. Rabbi Lapin, thank you so much again. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure to be with you. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks.
Well, that was super fun. I had an awesome time talking to Rabbi Lapin, and as I re-listened to it just now, it's refreshing to hear somebody that just tells you exactly where they're coming from, what their point of view is. Say what you want, agree or disagree, you know exactly where that guy stands, and I find that to be great. I also happen to agree with him completely on the fact that there is so much goodness to be gained by serving one another, and really that the best businesses are built on an ethos of service, that people to believe that business is evil or that you can lie and cheat and steal your way to scale, it's simply impossible. It's just, you can't do it. So I'm glad Rabbi Lapin is out there. I was sitting there thinking, what are the takeaways? And I just wrote down a few things. One, you really can't only make money when you serve other people. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus, but a young person I was talking to not long ago was saying that if I make more money, I'm taking it away from somebody else and they'll have less. And I mean, my head almost exploded. And I was just like, you poor thing, you poor child. That attitude, speaking of poor child, will keep you poor for as long as you hang on to that myth in your life. And so I'm glad Rabbi Lapin is out there spreading this message. Secondly, the clearer you are about how your service provides value to others, the more money you'll be able to make. The more you'll be able to understand what it is that people can't not buy. To quote my friend Merrick First, when you know that, when you know what your customer needs from you because it is the only place they can get that value that makes their life better, you have a customer for life. So that's a really important one. And lastly, my last point, I hope you take this with the respect that it is meant, is that Jews are awesome. They're fantastic people. I love hanging out with them. I didn't know any Jewish people, I don't think I knew any Jewish people until I got to college. I don't know if there are any Jews in my high school. I went to Catholic school for 12 years. David Lewis, my first Jewish friend across the hall at college. And Dave, hope you're doing well if you're out there, wherever you are. And then I went to business school. And of course and I worked in the media business for 15 years, and my Rolodex, I have a Rolodex. It's a paper Ferris wheel that I keep on my desk. No, it's a digital database. It's just full of Goldbergs and Goldsteins and all those wonderful people. I don't know what it is. I don't know if the shared values between the big Catholic family that I grew up in and Jewish families, the emphasis on guilt and shame, sure, but tradition and family and food and togetherness is something that I've always really vibed with a lot of Jewish people. They're also super fun, tell good jokes, throw good parties. So anyway, my newest friend from the Jewish community is Rabbi Daniel Lapin. Again, check out his website, youneedarabbi.com. Check out bookshop.org/lists/crazymoney, or click the link in the show notes. Send me an email at paul@crazymoneypodcast.com if you have ideas for guests or any comments to help me make this show the best damn podcast ever. Thanks for listening. Mike Carano, please make me sound smart.